Started. My welcome to Faith and Freedom at Life's End. My name is Zeena Regis, and I'm the director of Priority Populations for At Compassion and Choices, the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit dedicated to improving care, expanding options, and empowering everyone to chart their end-of-life journey. Before I introduce today's speakers, there are a few housekeeping items I wanted to share. If you need live caption in either English or Spanish, please enable it at the bottom of your screen by clicking the double C's and following the prompts. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box, and this is a great group to ask questions of, so we'd love questions, and that's located at the bottom of your screen. No need to raise your hand. We will take questions directly from the Q&A function, and we will get to as many of the questions as time allows. And lastly, the webinar is being recorded and will be sent out post the webinar if you'd like to view it again or share it with those in your network and community. So I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about why this webinar, and we're really excited to be here. So whenever we share information, CNC, Compassion and Choices, about our faith engagement efforts, I often receive really thoughtful questions and inquiries, particularly from those who support end-of-life options, but are concerned about religion's role in the movement. And the question always goes something like, why does Compassion and Choices invest in working with faith communities when so much of the opposition to medical aid in dying comes from religious institutions? And it's an important question, and that's why we're here today. Because faith nor secularism is one-dimensional. And there are deeply committed people, religious, spiritual, secular, atheists, who believe in autonomy, dignity, and compassion at the end of life. And today's panel brings together a mix of those voices, and you'll hear from leaders who draw strength from their faith traditions and others who lead from ethical and humanist values. And what unites all of us is a shared commitment to justice, equity, and care. And I am so honored to be in conversation with them today. So let me introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Mandisa Thomas, she, her pronouns. She is the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, and she's a powerful advocate for secular voices in public life. Mandisa has been featured on NPR's Code Switch, 1A, and CBS Sunday Morning. She currently serves on the board of Humanist Global Charity and is the recipient of numerous honors, including the 2020 Harvard Humanist of the Year. And we are so grateful to have Mandisa with us today. We also have Joy Pettigrew, and she is the community partnership manager at BJC, where she leads their Christians Against Christian Nationalism campaign. Joy is a gifted movement builder who uplifts Christian engagement in civic life and faith-based justice efforts across the country. And then we also have Reverend Alexa Frazier. Reverend Alexa is a minister and advocate for medical aid in dying. Before becoming a minister, she spent nearly 30 years managing public health research for the EPA, the CDC, and the NIH. Reverend Alexa brings both spiritual grounding and scientific expertise to her advocacy work, and she has testified before Maryland's legislature in support of end-of-life options many times. Let's welcome our panelists. And as we dive into this conversation, I want to spotlight Joy first to give us a little level setting and grounding for the conversation about Christian nationalism and religious freedom. So we'd love to hear, and I just love the work that BJC does. So I would love for us to start the conversation there. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Joy.
Thanks, Zeena. It's so great to be here and with all of you. I'm honored to be invited to share a little bit about our perspective as BJC. So BJC is the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Freedom, and we advocate for the separation of church and state and try to uplift the values of human dignity, pluralism, and democracy. And so the question around how do we define Christian nationalism? We really define it as a political ideology and cultural framework that seeks to merge and blend American and Christian identities. So Christian nationalism promotes the myth that the US was founded to be a Christian nation and implies that to be a true American, one has to be Christian and a particular kind of Christian, right? And so, but this is a myth, as some we know. The Constitution actually doesn't really mention religion, and when it does, it says that no religious tests can be given for anyone who wants to apply and run for office. And so, you don't have to be a Christian or religious to serve in government. In fact, the founding fathers explicitly tried to prevent the U.S. from being Christian explicitly. So Christian nationalism also overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy and racial subjugation. The notion that America is the promised land for white Christians undergirds manifest destiny and the doctrine of discovery. And we also see Christian nationalism undergirding anti-immigrant policies. And so when we think about Christian nationalism, it really violates the separation of church and state, and we know it hurts democracy. And so, as a Christian organization, we talk about Christian nationalism and see the harms that it is having in society and in our democracy, and really think that your faith shouldn't be imposed on into public spaces through policy. So I'll pause there and hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. Um, I would love to hear from you, Reverend Alexa. How do you see Christian nationalism impacting healthcare policy, but most specifically end of life policy right now in your work?
Sure, but I just got to say first that I love that definition of Christian nationalism. I'm just going to go a little bit further. I think Christian nationalism is the belief that a nation's identity and policies should be based on one illiberal framing of white Christian values, and that Christianity should have a privileged position in public life. It's Sharia law in America. And I always say white Christian nationalists because that's who it is, right? That's who's trying to keep others from power. And so they suppress voting, rig the mechanics of government, silence the opposition press, dehumanize their opponents. Like, wow, that is so not who I want us to be as a constitutional democracy. From a health policy perspective, this belief supplants personal autonomy with control. And I'll add an ahistoric interpretation of Christian doctrine. I mean, this is just not what Christianity is about, folks. At its extreme, it will make individual control over one's body subject to government-enforced codes. I mean, don't we already kind of see that with period trackers and so forth? So we see this at the state level with abortion, transgender care, age of marriage, which, bizarrely is very young in some states. And of course, medical aid in dying. Vaccination is another example. Zeena?
Thank you so much, Reverend Fraser. Mandisa, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us how, I know I've already said I have a lot to say about this, so we'd love to hear how you think about Christian nationalism and impacting health policy, especially end of life policy.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me on this panel with the other wonderful guests. Just to give a bit of background on Black Nonbelievers as an organization, we are an advocacy and community support organization for atheists, humanists, and agnostics, and those questioning their religious beliefs in favor of leaving, which already puts us at a it puts us at a disadvantage as far as representation in the public sphere. And also representing the Black community, and as a Black woman, Christian nationalism and how it impacts people of color, particularly Black folks and non-religious people, is just, in addition to what Joy and Reverend Alexa said, it is outright oppression. It is oppression of folks who from faith and non-faith backgrounds alike. It certainly imposes a certain set of doctrines on folks that were already marginalized if you look within the text of the religion itself. Now, of course, that could be up to interpretation. And the interpretation has always been to subjugate and oppress others. And I think that this is something that has always been an elephant in the room when it comes to these conversations, which is one of the reasons why non-religious voices need to be included and especially where we find common ground. Um, we advocate for evidence-based practices and principles, and Christian nationalism is anything but. It is definitely, when you look at the history of how religion and Christianity was imposed, even before the quote unquote founding of America as this nation, and it is correct that America wasn't founded as a Christian nation. Um, we see the overall oppression and suppression of Christianity in particular of people across the globe. And of course, Christian nationalism seeks to suppress this information. It still seeks to suppress and oppress the liberation of people throughout the world. And it's with Black communities being economically disadvantaged, also at a disadvantage when it comes to adequate healthcare, adequate services, adequate information, and also, as we are seeing in this current administration, being adversely impacted with the reduction in services as well as the reduction in the federal workforce, which employs a lot of people of color with the erasure of DEI. Christian nationalism is just oppression, period, and the imposition of one particular doctrine that will harm everyone.
Thank you so much, Mandisa. I am loving all the conversation in the chat as well. And I think I love that we're seeing that there are Wiccan, there are pagans, there are Buddhists. Um, Practice of shamanism. I think that is so important, especially in this conversation, to uplift that there is so much diversity um, in our voices, and then also so many people who subscribe to no faith at all. And so, thank you for sharing that in the chat. I'd like to ask. I think Reverend Alexa, I'd love to, we talked about it a little bit, but to specifically talk about how we see this Christian nationalism impacting dignified deaths and how you have seen that in your life and what conversations you see in your faith communities around that. I'd love to talk there.
Yeah. So I mentioned in the chat, and I can't remember, I don't think I said, though you did, Zeena, that I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister. And way before our time in 1988, Unitarian Universalists at the General Assembly level supported an action which, we don't have control over anything. We're not one of those religions, but it encourages people to support medical aid in dying since 1988, which, as I say, is so far above, so far before our time. People have forgotten it, but not all. So I find this white Christian nationalism to be incredibly controlling. I think Roe versus Wade is barely a first step. Stone, all the different things are linked, and I think they have bigger fish to fry. But if I were to guess, if the Supreme Court was asked to rule on this, they might well say that it's not legal. I just don't understand how people can conclude that decisions about the end of your life at the time when you have 6 months or less to live, when most people who go into hospice actually are there for only 2 weeks, I just don't get how anybody thinks that they can tell me and mine what should or shouldn't be legal. I'm just going to say that I think that there's a very strange kind of confluence of beliefs in that population, in that white nationalist, Christian nationalist population, that's both sort of soft euthanasia. I was at the hearing yesterday on Capitol Hill about the decrease in proposed decrease in Medicaid. And, there were 50 of our siblings with disabilities there protesting those potential cuts. And I don't know that there'll be a COVID vaccine or a flu vaccine released at a timely time this year. All of that feels like what I'd call soft euthanasia, and yet they're forcing us to not have agency over the end of our lives. It's a very, very disturbing and frankly kind of bizarrely incongruent pattern of control. So, and I think it all is going to favor white people, which is why I keep insisting that the word white needs to go into the phrase white Christian nationalism.
Thank you so much, Reverend Alexa. Mandisa, I am seeing some questions in the chat and some conversation, lots of good conversation. And I'd love to know, particularly in your community, Mandisa, how are you seeing people combat Christian nationalism? And kind of as an addendum, how are you seeing people do that at the end of life with their planning and their advanced care planning?
Yes, and thank you, Zeena. I'd like to first, I'd like to say thank you and express my appreciation for Compassionate Choices partnership with Black nonbelievers. It is becoming more of an important conversation for many in my organization and our members, because oftentimes we are already misrepresented when it comes to end of life preparation and planning, as well as if there's sudden loss of life. Many non-religious individuals are misrepresented as being religion or people of faith by their family members, and their legacies are not honored correctly. So what's happening now is, and I am a humanist celebrant, which means that I am certified, I am ordained through Universal Life Church, as well as endorsed by the Humanist Society. And so I officiate weddings. I also have officiated life services for non-religious, some of our members. And so what this looks like now for us in partnership with Compassionate Choices are many more of our members speaking up about what they want, what that planning looks like. If they had never thought about it before, they are definitely taking it more seriously now. They are looking at putting more of their plans into action and writing and spelling it out for their family members or loved ones who will be representing them, and knowing what their options are, knowing what their rights are, because there are so many people who still aren't aware of, they don't know where to start. And so understanding that as our demographic grows, there are options and there are rights that they have. And the conversations are starting to get people ready for whatever may come, and putting things in place so that if in the event that something happens to them where they're in a situation where they may need end of life care, and also if something happens to them, that their wishes are carried out, and they are carried out ethically and carried out authentically by people who will represent them properly as non-religious people, And being non-religious doesn't mean bad, right? It means that we were just non-religious, that we have morals, and there are a lot of non-religious people who do really good things for the world and would not like to have that misrepresented at, overall. And so how that comes into the planning and how they can receive help for that from our organization and other partner or another community organizations like Compassion and Choices has really been of more interest, and our members are becoming more enthusiastic as well as more proactive about getting these things done.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Mandisa. We've gotten a lot of just a lot of people being even more interested in advanced care planning exactly for the reasons that you stated and really wanted to have all of that in order. You also spoke to just the importance of us organizing and having these conversations. So, Joy, I'd love to hear from you. How are you seeing this organizing happen across communities, across a diversity of different populations? I love in your background Christians against Christian nationalism, but what are strategies that you're seeing communities employing?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So our Christians Against Christian Nationalism campaign is really about fighting back on white Christian nationalism. And we've had, since we launched the campaign, thousands of people across the country who reached out to sign our statement, but also to say, we really want to do something about this. We're really concerned. So beyond educating community members, most of whom are people of faith, but they're not all people of faith. There might be people who are of no faith or of different faiths who want to partner with us or do work with us. So some of what we're seeing is where, as people are asking, what can we do? We're directing people to local organizing because one of the most effective strategies in the midst of authoritarianism and what we're seeing happen on the federal level is really for local communities to act and to band together and push back on a local level. And that's where we're seeing some movement. And so we are training and equipping people who some are clergy, some are faith leaders, some are just lay people who are concerned about this um, and doing interfaith coalitional work in order to push back. And so we're seeing, like in North Carolina, Winston-Salem, we have a group that launched there, and they're bringing people in, and they're really starting with thinking about public education and some of the ways that indoctrination is happening in public schools, the way of funding through white Christian nationalism, and their agenda is being pushed to private schools that many of which are religious private schools. So we're seeing local groups like the one in Winston-Salem really start to partner with public education organizations. And so I think there's definitely work to be done, and we're seeing people fired up to act. And some of the things around that is wanting to be strategic to help groups think about what kind of relationship building needs to happen in the local level to get to a point where you can have a collective action event, whether it's a boycott or some sort of demonstration or event or strike, all the relationship building that needs to happen before that. And so those are some of the things that we're seeing, really also knowing and acknowledging that because white Christian nationalism birthed it is a distortion of Christianity, but it is affiliated with that, really is the role of it really it's the Christians who also need to do the work here. So we're seeing people show up in that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joy.
Um, Zeena, there's something I'd love to say, kind of building on what Joy just said about local actions. I've had Joy something of testifying in the Maryland state legislature or Senate almost once a year for 10 years. Once or twice I may have both testified in the House and Senate. Usually it was one or the other was the focus. And I want to just tell a story because stories are so compelling. Somehow in the frame of a question, it wasn't really a question, one of the legislators said something along the line of, how do you know the person's really going to die? My mother-in-law was put into hospice, and she lived for a year and a half. And then he said the thing that we needed to push back on. He said, my family and I learned so much from her. She was an example. She was a blessing. She taught my children. I mean, he just went on with no focus on the mother-in-law's experience. Now, maybe that mother-in-law lived for exactly a year and a half as she wanted to. Maybe she lived for all but 2 weeks. I don't know. But the next person who testified from our side, who was an advocate and a person with cancer, made it clear in a memorable phrase, which was, my death is not for anyone's edification. My death is not for your entertainment. He fell silent. He actually left the room. But I think there was something important said there about whose story is this, right? So I'm a chaplain in addition to being a minister. And by the way, I'm absolutely happy to accompany anyone who is on a journey that doesn't involve, I'm not a Christian, doesn't involve Christianity, doesn't involve any faith structure. It is not my job to push anything on you. But I will say that when you're a chaplain, you focus on the person at the center of the equation. Everybody helps the person at the center of the equation. And then people push out their distress. It's called care in something out. I don't know, can't remember what it's care in aid out or something like that. And his position was the antithesis of that. The person at the center wasn't even at the center. And that feels like a really important story.
That is a very important story. And I feel like it leads into one of the questions. And I've seen some information going out in the chat, but one of the questions in the Q&A box is, as a gay Buddhist witch, how do I protect my spiritual beliefs and rights as I near the end of my physical journey? And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but one of the things that I'd love to offer too is that even wherever you are and however whatever state you are in or jurisdiction, it's so important to interview your end of life professionals. um, I've been I was a hospice chaplain for 10 years, and you would be probably horrified at the number of chaplains and nurses in hospice who will say, I got into this work to save people, meaning salvation in the Christian sense, wanting them to be saved before they die. And so it's so important. And that's one of the resources we have on our website is how to interview a hospice. I would even add questions about, like, this is my identity. How do we, how are you working with people like me? What has it seen? Tell me about your organization's cultural competency. All of these things are so, so important. And that's a start. And I know it's like often a time of crisis, and just like a lot of grief. And so we don't often think to ask those questions of our healthcare professionals, but that's that's a real practical step that we can do for us and our loved ones, of making sure that hospice professionals, death doulas, anyone who's walking with us or someone we love through this journey, that they align and support and celebrate our beliefs, because I've seen way too often that does not happen. Reverend Alexa, I saw your hand up.
Oh, I think that was just me
Oh,
gesticulating wildly.
oh, okay. But that is one of the things I would offer. And also just getting very, very clear on what your end of life values and priorities are, so that you can begin putting those in place. And one of the things that my kind of the bee in my bonnet is that I feel like we start with advanced care planning in the in the wrong place in the sense of in a very like medical, legalese, financial way, versus starting with our values and priorities often, like in the culture. When people think about end of life planning, when they think about advanced care planning, they think of the legal process, the financial process, the medical process, but often don't think about like, what do I really want that transition to look like in my life. And so starting there, and also we make it a very isolated, solitary process when I think there is so much power in talking about it as a community, and with your circle of support. So in your faith communities, if you're a part of one, in your community organizations, I have been blessed many times to be with Black non-believers and do workshops on story-centered end-of-life planning. What does that look like? End-of-life planning that is aligned with your story and your values. What does a memorial service look like that is that way, so that it's not just ceded to a funeral home who is going to put in a cookie cutter kind of Christian service. So that's just one of the things that I would love to offer, that as making this conversation not such a solitary conversation, but one that's a communal one, and with our circle of support that we know will make sure that our wishes are honored. Is there anything, anybody else in the panel have anything that, any tangible things, or I see two hands, Mandisa.
Yes, thank you, Zeena, and I'm going to lower my hand here. Before the webinar got started, you see me in the seatbelt because, and I'm actually pulled over right now. I am my family and I are on our way back to Georgia from Mississippi. We attended the funeral of a cousin-in-law for me, cousin for my husband and my son. And it took place in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Philadelphia, you may be familiar with, is the town where the three civil rights workers were killed in 1964, which really sparked, which was a major, change, a major game changer in the civil rights movement. And so, of course, many of the people who lived there, especially many of the Black folks, are very poor and they're very religious. And of course, the ceremony was the cousin was a Christian, and of course, so she had a Christian memorial and gravesite service. But one thing I thought was very interesting was going back to what Reverend Alexa was saying about, and what you, Zeena, was saying about centering the person at hand. The Reverend talked about how you had to trust God's process, and it was almost like a sermon, and trying to get people to just simply trust Jesus in the process. And what I was thinking was, our cousin, who was 63, in somewhat relatively good health, was very silent about what she was going through. And unfortunately, that tends to happen, especially with Black women. We often are silent about our pain. We're silent about the things that we want. They are often assumed, and that needs to change. And it's about humanizing people. It really is about trying to and letting folks know that they matter, whether they are here with us or when that time comes when we are not. They still matter at the end of the day. And so humanizing people, instead of just putting this framework of simply what they believed in or what their ideology was, who were they at their core? And how did that resonate with both people of faith and non-faith? And I think that that's something that is extremely important. And it also spoke to the very, very overwhelming presence of religion in Black communities, and how, although the landscape of non-religion and secularism is changing, we are still seeing an overwhelming presence in our communities. And it's not my job to convert people. It is not my job to tell them that, that the God that you believe in or your religious values don't exist, although we can have good conversations about them, it is my position, it is my job to let people know that if you are non-religious and you are questioning, you are not alone. There is a community that offers that can give you support and offer resources if you need them. And we often find that many of our members do. And so finding that and tailoring our wishes and our legacies to where they must be respected even by our religious counterparts and family members is definitely going to be important. Unfortunately, it still feels like a fight for us half the time to even be recognized as human beings. And that is a huge important part of my work in this community. And again, I am very grateful for the partnerships that we have cultivated and developed, because I love the fact that Zeena and folks at Compassion and Choices have been able to engage members of Black non-believers and see our humanity and understand what's important to us, which is just as important, if not more important. And we have so much common ground with our religious counterparts. We've also done some work with BJC, the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. And it's like, and understanding what the, how different communities are impacted is going to be very important. The education, the compassion, the empathy, the humanity at the end of the day is going to be important for us all.
Thank you so much, Mandisa. I know, Reverend Alexa, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I thank you for whoever put in carry and jump out. That's the right thing. I just blanked for a second there. I want to say that there was a question which I think you started to ask about how's your faith community responded to these ideological shifts. And for me, as a Unitarian Universalist, we organize, build community with faith and non-faith partners, and we just show up. I mean, like, that is so much of it, is you just show up. We also signed the amicus brief in a variety of court settings against white Christian nationalist policies. I think the Quakers were the lead organization on that, but that's another area. And like through it all, hold love at the center, right? That's the point. Hold it at the center of your values, message, actions. That's how you build the partnerships and the relationships. So I wanted to touch because I had gotten this far into this without like saying love at the center.
Thank you so much, Reverend Alexa. This and the Q&A, I mean, the chat box is making me think. One thing I find that talking about death and dying in this, in the way that we do, builds community quickly. I see there is so much community building even in the chat. And so that just makes me think of how much opportunity we have to build a movement, to continue to build a movement. We already have a movement, but to expand and make our movement more inclusive, and really have diverse voices, because that is so important to have a dignified death, but also what it looks like to live a dignified life. And all of these things together, we are all asking these questions and figuring out how to do it together. And so I just want to highlight, like, I've just seen so many people answering questions, each other's questions, and responding to conversations that are really deep. And I love that. Um, One of my questions, and I would love any panelist to answer this. There's the question of Christian nationalism making, in many ways, um, trying to redefine death. And we see that in a variety of ways, but we're also a culture who doesn't like to talk about death and dying. So I'd love to know, how can we in our movement have messaging about death and conversation starters and all of that that are entryways for people into this conversation. Mandisa.
Yes, thank you, Zeena. I think it's important to start off by acknowledging how scary and intimidating the subject matter can be. I think that there are many people who don't like to admit that they are scared, and the fact that there's information that they may not be aware of, and it may be a good place to start by making it okay to be vulnerable, and admitting that, even beyond storytelling, but definitely mutual sharing. Like, I will say that I am still terrified at the thought of death and the thought of dying. It scares it, even though I know it is coming, and even though in my logical mind and in my perspective, I know that I will cease to exist. So in there is no heaven or hell, regardless of whatever religion defines it, to go to. I'm just going to be gone. My loved ones are going to be gone. But that is still a scary prospect. And so I think that it is important to start with acknowledging that it is a very, very sensitive subject, it's a very sensitive topic. It's an important one, but it's understandable that it can be very intense and intimidating, and making it comfortable for people to be vulnerable and to start at a small pace is going to be a really good start.
Thank you so much, Mandisa. Anyone else?
Well, I have something to say. I was so glad that somebody mentioned death cafes in the chat, because that is also something that I've utilized. There's a terrific UU course on a couple courses on end of life that I think I would recommend. You know, I'll tell you a phrase to listen for. If I die, this is a sentence that tells you something about where somebody is on their journey of honesty and dealing with what's inevitable, like for all of us, even my son. I can get it, I can accept it for me, but even for my son, it's inevitable. So anyway, listen for that phrase. And I want to say something about a false dichotomy that I see regularly with hearings that I attend, with the few people I interact with who don't support this legislation. There is a false dichotomy that it's hospice or medical aid in dying. And that is so wrongheaded, because in point of fact, Washington or Oregon, I don't remember which one, the Hospice Society, which was against medical aid in dying some time ago, has actually now come out to support it. That these are not oppositional positions. Some of the people who, are on a lot of radio shows and who I've been on radio shows with, they view it as either or. No. Let's start with hospice and figure out what else is going on. Is my pain controlled? How is this going? Are there other factors? I mean, honestly, my dad partially ended his life in a way he shouldn't have had to, with his advancing Parkinson's, because he kept falling. And he knew that that meant that he'd end up in an assisted living place and that he would have no power to do what he wanted to do in that place. So it's not either or. And I also wanted to say that I think that the surveys that Compassionate Choices has done that show that, at least in Maryland, something like 70% of folks support the bill. That's critical. And actually, before we opened up the room, somebody from Compassionate Choices mentioned that the number may even be higher for people with disabilities, although that is a group that sometimes oh, no, maybe it was another conversation. At any rate, the idea being that everybody who meets the criteria should have this choice. And what's going on with these legislators? that they're not supporting this choice when something like 70% of people across all the demographics are. I don't know, how you work through that to represent your people. You support this choice. And here in Maryland, we had a tremendous advocate for many years, a state legislator who coined the phrase, and I encourage all of you to use it. We are all one bad death from supporting this bill. Just let that sink in. Somebody whose death goes wrongly awry, and I've known him, maybe you've known him. I remember going to speak with a legislator who was married to a church member, so I thought he was on board and he wasn't on board. And I went back a couple of years and I said, Eric, how's it, what do you think now? And he said, oh, my aunt died. I'm a supporter now. So getting people past that initial reticence that I think you brought up so well, Mandisa, into imagining, actually seeing and experiencing what a good death is or a bad death is, seems pretty important.
Thank you so much, Reverend Alexa. We are at the end of getting towards the end of our time. And so I'd love to just, one last question for each of our panelists. Um, Thinking about what our participants can take with them, what is one action you'd have them do to A, combat Christian nationalism, or B, to start thinking about compassionate end of life care for all, or both. So I'd love, however we want to answer that, what's on your mind as one thing you'd like people to take away and put into action? Mandisa.
I guess I'll go first since, and I'll try to be brief here. The first thing, and even I appreciate everyone in the chat, but it is going to be important to educate yourselves. Be on a lot of, there is a lot of history that many people don't get, and which we see this current administration with Christian nationalism trying to erase. They are trying to erase the very ugly history of atrocities committed against many demographics. And whether we like it or not, much of that includes people of color, which I represent unapologetically. And it is very valid here because even according to the Statistics at Compassion and Choices, many African Americans do not have the information that's needed for end of life preparation. And part of that is systemic. And we just need to be real about that. And there needs to be an education beyond, like, on the history, on the institutional factors, and like you said, how Christian nationalism is trying to basically dehumanize all of us that don't identify as Christian, or Christian in the way they deem it, Christianity in the way they deem it. They're trying to dehumanize us. And so it's important to look at the history, the current state, and also how we start doing it in the future. And I do agree that local community efforts do help in collaboration, in conjunction with the resources that are already available on the national level. That organizations like Compassion and Choices definitely provide. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. If there's already that work being done, then let's work more in collaboration with each other while still implementing and offering care and support for people, especially those who have no idea where to start. Because we have to remember that most indoctrination is fundamental, meaning that many people did not learn outside of their particular paradigm. And so much of this is new. And so it's important that we're patient with each other, but also that we are challenging each other to learn past our paradigms, past our communities, and not just simply going by misconceptions and perceptions. we're really going to have to dig in and learn more so that we can do more.
Thank you so much. That's
Yeah, I'll jump on that. I definitely want to second what Mandisa said about working on in the local level and being educated. I think one of the things that um, I find hopeful when I look at research that was done in 2023 about Christian nationalism is that 68% of people in our country are skeptical or rejectors. So it is a majority. And I think what that points towards is how does those of us who are a majority really come together and resist? And how do we do that across differences? And I think I find some hope in some of the interfaith coalitional spaces that I see where people are coming across differences to educate each other on different issues and work in advocacy and organizing. So I think getting connected and getting connected on the local level and finding those people who have similar shared purposes can do a lot. So that's what I'll say.
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you, Joy.
So thank you, wonderful panelists. And I feel it's really important to second the message of Black people being a target on this. I'll say that the first time I ever heard about anything approaching medical aid and dying, I was raised by my dad. We were a two-person family, and we had a Black housekeeper. And she developed cancer, and she wrote my dad, and he gave me the letter that he replied to her, which was something like, I hope that you get the pain relief that you need. I hope that everybody could be as wise as you are. I hope that you have the end of life choices that you want. And I mean, we're talking 1970 about when he wrote that to her. And it was clear to me that even coming from whatever state of wokeness he was in, he understood that her position as a Black woman in Washington, D.C. would be harder than what he would face to get what he wanted. So that's been with my understanding absolutely at every point in my journey. I actually am preaching on the subject, what can you do in general this Sunday? And I think so yes, contact your local Compassion and Choices chapter, figure out what they're doing that they need people for as advocates, as storytellers, as people to make phone calls. I don't, every state is different. Every state's in a different place, but their work is fabulous. With regard to the larger question of fighting this oligarchical takeover, I think we all need to take care of ourselves. I think we need to take care of our precious selves. And I don't know what that means for you. I'm making baby quilts. Like, really, I'm making baby quilts. And I'm showing up for what I can show up for. And I want to mention that at my local event that I go to weekly, that maybe some of you go to a similar event weekly that's held at a particular place in your town. Every week there is an elder couple in wheelchairs, and they always sit with the woman on the left, and she holds a sign that says the Holocaust, and he holds a sign that says, been there, not again. There is no too old, too frail to show up. Now, I recognize that there are privileges that some people have that make it possible to show up that other people don't. But I just have to say that week after week, in the rain, in whatever is there, this couple shows up in their his and her wheelchairs with their his and her signs. That doesn't mean that somebody who's got different legal statuses or different identities, your thing may be different, but I'm not opting out. And I hope that those of you who can show up will do it too.
Beautiful. Thank you. to our panelists for showing up in such a powerful way and for your courage and your clarity and your conviction. We are so grateful. Reverend Alexa, Mandisa, and Joy, we are so, so grateful for your presence here. Yes, there will be, this is being recorded and it'll be sent out. And also there will be links to resources. Um, I want to make sure that everyone knows that Reverend Alexa is open to provide chaplaincy support to those who are discerning made. So we'll send out your information if that's okay in the email, Reverend Alexa. And also information about the work that Mandisa and Joy are doing. We'll have links to their work and their organizations. So please look for that. And also you'll have more ways to engage with Compassion and Choices. One of the things that we love to do, I'm on the engagement team, and we really love to engage, and meaning we want to create um, spaces and places for you to talk about these issues that resonate with you in your context. And so, if you want me to come to your faith community, if you want me to come to your death conversation, if you want me to come to your community agency, we do a lot of that work. And so, I would love to keep this conversation going. I want to really thank our participants who have just been so engaged and asked amazing questions. If there's a question that we didn't get to or that you'd love the answer to, please respond to the email that we'll send out, and we'll definitely keep this conversation going. If you want resources for your community, please let me know. We'll send that out. And we just kind of hot off the press are creating a faith leaders toolkit for faith communities to engage around these issues. So you should be hearing more about that very soon, but please know that that is coming down the pipe. And so the work of Compassion and Choices depends on the support of supporters like you. So if you feel moved to donate, your work, you sustain our work. So please do that. There's a link in the chat. And I just want to thank you again. And everyone, take care. And we are just so grateful for your presence here. Bye, everyone.